Hello everyone. I will share real stories that I know and I'm sure you will like them.
The soft fabric slid over my skin as I pulled the dress into place, smoothing it down over my waist. The fitting room was warm, the air thick with the faint scent of perfume and fabric softener. I exhaled slowly, turning to examine myself in the full-length mirror, tilting my head slightly. The dress was form-fitting, hugging in all the right places, the kind of thing I hadn't worn in years. Something about it made me feel different, bold, aware of my own presence in a way I hadn't been in a long time. I reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, lost in the moment. The house was quiet, the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds, casting long golden streaks across the floor. My husband was out for the evening, and I had the space to myself, a rare luxury. I took my time, slipping in and out of different dresses, letting the fabric glide over my skin, enjoying the solitude. It had been a while since I had taken the time to just feel good in something new, to admire the way the colors and textures transformed me, even if no one else was there to see it. Then I heard it. A creak. Faint but distinct. The sound of a door opening somewhere in the house. My breath caught in my throat. I turned sharply, the hem of the dress swaying with the movement. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. But then, another sound, footsteps, hesitant, pausing just outside the bedroom door. And then, a voice. "Oh, sorry. I didn't know anyone was here." I froze, pulse kicking up. The voice was familiar, too familiar. I turned slowly, my breath unsteady. Standing in the doorway, wide-eyed, was my neighbor's son, Jake. His gaze flickered over me briefly before he looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. I was just dropping something off for my mom. She said you were expecting it." The door was open, so he stopped himself, shaking his head. I should have knocked. My fingers tightened around the fabric of the dress, my mind scrambling to catch up. I didn't hear you come in." His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something else, but no words came. Instead, his gaze lifted, just for a second. Quick, fleeting, but enough to send a quiet shiver through me. The moment stretched between us, taut with something neither of us dared to name. The air felt different now, charged, as if something unspoken had settled between us in the quiet. I should have said something. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, eased the tension. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, the weight of his presence making the space between us feel impossibly small. Jake cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. "I'll just leave this here," he said, holding up a small bag, something wrapped neatly inside. His voice was steady, but his fingers fidgeted slightly, gripping the package a little too tightly. I nodded slowly, swallowing. "Thanks. You can set it on the dresser." He hesitated for a second, then stepped inside, moving carefully, as if unsure whether he was supposed to be there. I watched as he placed the bag down, his movements deliberate, controlled. His shoulders were tense, as if he were holding himself back, his breath measured, his jaw clenched just slightly. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. The dress clung to my skin, accentuating every line, every curve. I hadn't planned on anyone seeing me like this. Especially not him. He turned back toward me, hesitating in the space between us. "It looks good. The dress, I mean." I exhaled a soft laugh, feeling the tension in my chest ease just a little. "You think so?" Jake nodded, his expression still careful. "Yeah." A pause. A second too long. I should have thanked him, should have moved past it. But instead, I found myself holding his gaze, feeling something unfamiliar settle between us. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to name. The air in the room felt warmer now, charged with something unspoken. Jake stood there, lingering just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle between us. His gaze flickered downward, but only briefly, before meeting mine again. There was hesitation in his stance, something restrained, as if he were trying to decide whether to speak or simply walk away. I swallowed, my fingers brushing against the smooth fabric of the dress. "I haven't worn something like this in years," I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. "I just wanted to see if it still suited me." Jake's lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but then he shook his head, his jaw tightening for a brief second. It does. The simplicity of the words sent a quiet shiver through me. There was no hesitation in his voice that time, no trace of politeness. Just honesty. I shifted my weight, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, suddenly more aware of the way the dress hugged my form, of the way Jake was still standing there, watching me like he wasn't sure if he should stay or go. You probably have somewhere to be, I said, more to break the silence than anything else. His lips twitched, almost like he wanted to smirk, but he held himself back. Not really. Another pause. Another moment that lasted just a little too long. I exhaled slowly, glancing down at the dress, then back at him. Would you mind helping with the zipper? Jake's breath hitched just slightly, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. He hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides before he stepped forward. Sure. I turned around, facing the mirror as I felt the warmth of his presence behind me. The room felt smaller, quieter. The sound of the zipper being undone was louder than it should have been, each inch exposing more of my skin to the cool air. His fingers grazed my back lightly, his touch brief but enough to send a slow wave of heat through me. He worked slowly, almost too slowly. I caught his gaze in the mirror and, for a second, neither of us looked away. When the zipper reached the bottom, he didn't immediately step back. His fingers rested lightly at the base of my spine, barely touching, but still there. The air between us tightened, heavy with something neither of us dared to name. Then he exhaled, stepping back. All done. I turned around, holding the dress up slightly, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands. Thanks. Jake nodded, but he didn't move to leave just yet. You should wear things like that more often. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. Yeah? His expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. Yeah. We stood there, caught in something neither of us expected, and for the briefest moment, I wondered what would happen if neither of us broke the silence. But then, he took a slow step back and the spell between us shifted. I should probably go. I nodded, exhaling, but I didn't say anything as he turned toward the door. Just before he left, he glanced back at me once more, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite name. And then, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, the dress loose against my frame, my heart still unsteady. Nothing had happened. And yet, I knew nothing would ever be quite the same again.